Hello everybody and welcome to the How to Play video for Snapshot. Snapshot is a game for 2 to 4 players. At the 2-player count, it probably takes about 15 minutes, but it can go up to about 45 minutes at 4 players. In Snapshot, we are wildlife photographers trying to become Photographer of the Year for Snapshot magazine. As you might imagine, we do this by photographing these animal cards, but you can also earn bonus points by getting photography awards and by completing your assignments. So, what's in the box? First off, we have the animal cards. There are 36 of these. Each one has a unique image of the different animals that you'll be trying to photograph. We then have the 4 habitats that the animals will live in, and 3 photography awards for each of the habitats. So that's 12 in total, plus a bonus 3 for one of each habitat. We also have a pile of tracking tokens here, and we have 10 assignment cards that the players will use for bonus points. We have 6 dice to photograph the animals, and we have some reference cards, a score pad, and finally, the first player marker. To set up the game, you lay out the 4 habitat cards, going up from 2, 3, 4, 5, and then you lay the award tokens above the corresponding habitat. Put the animal cards to one side, put the one of each habitat awards to one side, put the tracking tokens accessible to all players, as well as the dice, give every player an assignment card. The rest can go back in the box. And then you draw 3 animal cards. So these go straight into the habitats. Now if you draw an animal that is lower than the one before, you actually just quickly shift it and put it back. That's only for setup. During the game, that's a very important feature. But for setup, we lay it out like this. Finally, you need to decide on the starting player, and that's always the last person to have taken a photograph. They get 2 tracking tokens, and everyone else gets 2 plus 1 extra in the turn order. So the second person gets 3, the third person gets 4, and so on. There is a helpful reminder on the back of the first player token. Give that to the starting player. So, to win Snapshot, you need to have the most prestige. Only the most prestigious photographer can be crowned Photographer of the Year. The first way to do this is on the animals themselves. Each animal is worth prestige depending on how difficult it is, so the value goes up. Secondly, we have photography awards. If you complete sets of animals, you get the awards. Finally, you have the assignment card from Snapshot magazine. This is in 2 sections, the cover photo and the feature article. And if you complete these during the game, you'll get bonus points. These are the 3 ways: the animals, awards, assignment. That is how you win the game. The game ends when one player has photographed a certain amount of creatures, as described on this reference card. In a 2-player game, that's 9. In a 3-player game, that's 8. And in a 4-player game, that's 7. As soon as a player has photographed the target amount of creatures, you finish the round back to the first player, so that everyone has had an equal amount of turns, and then the game is over and you score up. Now your turn is broken down into 3 stages. The first is the research phase, where you are drawing cards from the deck, putting them into the habitat. This represents your researching what animals are available, what animals are out, and you're trying to plan which animals you're going to actually photograph. You keep drawing until you're ready to stop, or until your turn is over, but I'll go into that in a second. Then you move into the preparation stage. At this point, you place dice onto the animals that you want, and remember, you've always got to place 1 dice onto the habitat, at least 1 onto the habitat. Then you can also spend your tracking tokens to boost your chances. And then finally, we move into the 3rd stage, which is where you roll the dice. Now, once you start to roll the dice, you can't change where you put the other dice and you can't add more tokens. So you've got to make sure that you're happy before you go into this stage. Once you've rolled your dice and hopefully photographed your animals, you then do a cleanup stage. So you take the animals you photographed or discard the ones you haven't. You get rid of the tokens that you've spent, and then you check to see if you've won any photography awards. You also check to see if you've triggered the end of the game. Then play continues to the player on your left. Okay, well let's get started so you can see the game in action. I'm ready to go. It's the beginning of my turn. I've got my assignment card and I've got my 2 tracking tokens. Hopefully I can get some more soon. First thing I do is research. So I draw the cards. Now, each animal card is laid out in the same way. The difficulty value is here. That's how hard it is to photograph. There are some statistics here which represent the different traits of the animal. We have whether they're mammal, reptile, bird, etc. We have their lifespan, we have their diet, and where they are in the food chain. Finally, in this little yellow star, we have prestige of this particular animal. And anything in that little yellow star represents prestige. So on all the different awards, you'll see that symbol repeated. Okay, so I draw a card. It is a white rhino, goes into Savannah, and I get another tracking token. These tracking tokens are used to mitigate bad luck and to boost your odds, so you want as many as you can. So I'm going to keep drawing. A puffin, okay, that goes into the shoreline, get another token, fantastic. So at this point, I'm earning my tokens. So you might think, why don't you just keep drawing until the deck is done? There is a risk. So the difficulty of the animal ranges from 2 all the way up to 10. And there's only one of each in each habitat. So you always know which animals come out. If ever you draw a card that is the lower difficulty than the animal that's already in the habitat, they all get spooked and run away. This represents you losing your opportunity. You've waited too long, the animals have all kind of fled. And so when the animals are spooked, what happens is all those cards in that habitat disappear. They're gone into the discard pile. And your turn is now over. So you really want to balance the risk of drawing more cards versus how high the value of the difficulty is and judge whether it's worth drawing another card. So let's say you did draw a card which is lower than the animal that's already there. Your turn's about to be over. So there are two things that you can do. Number one, you can just let it happen. The animals all get chased away, and you draw 3 tracking tokens as a consolation prize. In general, whenever you end your turn without photographing a single animal, you always get these 3 consolation tokens as a way of helping players who are doing badly keep in the game. But let's say that you don't want your turn to end early. You want to keep going. So now there's only one option left to you, and that is reserving. So you can reserve cards that come out. Before you place them into the habitat, you can simply put them into your hand and they're out of the game temporarily. Now these cards can be placed into the habitats later, even on the same turn, so they're not gone, you can still photograph them later. But what it means is they no longer trigger the animals getting spooked. So if you're about to get spooked, you can just take that card, put it into your hand. But you've only got 2 reserve slots in your hand, so you need to think tactically about which cards you reserve and which you leave onto the habitat in order to get chased away. There's no way to get rid of these cards from your hand except by trying to photograph them. So you don't want to have them clogged up with cards that you really don't want, because then you'll be forced to spend dice on them later to try and photograph them. Other players can actually reserve cards on your turn as well. So let's say this hornbill came out. These animals are spooked. My turn's about to be over. I don't want to reserve it, but the player on my left does want to reserve it. So they can offer me 1 tracking token from their supply to pay for that card. If I accept, they take it, they put it into their hand, and it's now in their reserved slot. If 2 players want to reserve the card, then it always goes in turn priority. So it starts with the active player, they always get first choice, then the second, then the third, and so on. And so that way, there's no argument about who gets to reserve it. You can actually reserve any of the animals that are drawn. You don't have to wait until the animals are spooked. So let's pretend this hornbill was never drawn. Another player might choose to reserve this rhino as soon as I draw it. Now, they can offer me the reserve as normal, take the card. But if I want to photograph that rhino, I can say, no, you don't get to reserve it. But you do have to place 1 dice onto the rhino and 1 dice onto the habitat to represent that you are now going to photograph it this turn. You can't deny someone from reserving a card and not photograph it this turn. You've got to attempt to photograph it this turn. Or you can also reserve it for yourself, put it into your hand. Again, you don't have to reserve only when the animals have been spooked. Remember, you can only reserve an animal before it's been placed into the habitat. Once it has been placed into the habitat and you've started to draw another animal, or you've started to prepare in the next phase, then you can no longer reserve that animal. You also cannot reserve animals that were already in the habitat at the start of your turn, and the same goes for other players trying to reserve on your turn. You can only ever reserve the animal that has just been drawn by that player. During the drawing phase, you get a token every time you place an animal. But remember, you only get that token if it is actually placed. If you reserve the animal, or another player reserves the animal, or if the animal is spooked, then you do not get that tracking token. It's only if the animal is actually placed into the habitat. Let's get back to my turn. So I've drawn this hornbill, but I had to reserve it because otherwise it would end my turn. So now I'm looking at the cards. There's an 8, there's an 8, there's a 6. The numbers are looking a bit high, so I'm going to leave the animals as they are. I'm not going to draw anymore. I'm going to go into stage 2, which is preparing. So to prepare, you simply take your 6 dice and you place them on the animals you want to photograph. Now, this is a good point to check your assignment card. On your assignment card, you'll have a cover photo. that lists 2 animals. You need to photograph at least one of those in order to get a bonus 5 prestige. If you photograph both animals, that doesn't add any extra bonus. You just need to photograph one. There can only be one animal on the cover. Secondly, you have the feature article, and the magazine is asking you to photograph animals with the traits listed there because they want to run an article about them. So whenever you see one of those symbols on the animals themselves, that will get you bonus points. At the end of the game, you count up the number of symbols that you have matching those two on your card, and there's a little chart here that shows you how many points you'll get. So on my particular assignment card, I have average lifespan of over 31 years, and I have omnivores. Now, actually, by sheer chance, the card I've reserved is perfect because it has both of those symbols on it. So this is going to get me good bonus points at the end. So I'm going to go for that one. Now, I reserved it this turn, but you are still allowed to photograph it on the same turn. So you place 1 dice on it to represent that you're going to photograph it. You place 1 dice on the habitat. Every animal you photograph needs at least 1 dice, but what you're trying to do is you're trying to match the difficulty score on the card by rolling a total on the dice. So for this hornbill, it's only a 2. That's probably going to be quite safe with a single dice, but I could spend 1 tracking token to boost my total by 1 for each token spent. So if I put 1 token onto this hornbill, that guarantees me that I'm going to photograph it, because the lowest I can ever roll on a dice is 1. But the highest is obviously a 6. So if I wanted to go for this white rhino and place 1 dice on it, I now would need to put a lot of tokens on to make it count, or put extra dice. You can photograph as many animals from as many habitats as you like. The only rules are there's always got to be at least 1 dice on an animal and at least 1 dice on a habitat. You cannot photograph an animal by placing tokens alone. Even if you place enough tracking tokens to photograph it outright, you still need to place 1 dice. And this is where the strategy comes in for Snapshot. How confident are you about your odds? How lucky do you feel this turn? Are you going to spread your dice out or focus them all on the animals that you really want? And I can't tell you the right answer because sometimes you're lucky and sometimes you're unlucky. But that's where the tracking tokens come in. So if you're feeling unlucky or it's a really important animal, you can just stack up the points on these cards to make your odds pretty safe. It's always worth keeping 1 token behind to pay if you want to reserve a card that comes out. Now remember, you also need to explore the habitat where the animals live. To explore the habitat, you need to roll the result that's shown on the card itself. So the savannah, I need to roll a 3. Now, it's not a total. So for the animals, it is a total, but for the habitats, it is just that result. So if I rolled a 1 and a 2, that would actually be a failure because I need to roll a 3 on one of the dice. Now, I can roll above, and the same with the animals. You can always roll more, that's fine, but you need to have that minimum listed on the cards. So for the savannah, I need to roll a 3. So let's roll the dice. And I've rolled a 1. Okay, so I failed. I needed to roll a 3. So that's it. My turn will be over. These animals will be chased away, and we're done. But there is a way to mitigate that. You can spend 2 tokens to re-roll a failed dice on the habitat. This is actually listed on the card itself. So I'm going to spend 2 tokens, and I can take them either from my own supply, or I can take them off the animals that I'm trying to photograph. And I'm going to re-roll that dice. Let's see. Fantastic. So I rolled a 4. So that means that's succeeded. These tokens, because it was successful, they go now into the supply. If you were not successful, if you failed again as another one, then you can either spend more tokens and keep rolling, or you can call it quits and you actually get the tokens back. So if ever the tokens are not used, not spent successfully, you keep them. But if ever they are spent successfully, they are lost. That's a way again of if you are getting really bad luck, you're not going to be down and out. So I re-rolled, I got a 4, I'm ready to go. So now I can roll for my Nile crocodile. Oh, I got a 2. Plus 2, that's a 4, so it's failed. I get the tokens back because I failed, but the animal is chased away because as I was trying to photograph it, I tripped over or I stepped on a tree branch, the animal is spooked, and it's gone. That's discarded. Now I'm going to go for my hornbill, but I've already got 1 token, and it's a 2, so it's a guaranteed success. But I'll roll it for fun. Oh, and I got a 1, so it's a good job I spent that token. Now, because it was successful, the token is spent back to the bank, but I keep the card. It goes into my lineup, and these are now my points. So I'll roll for the white rhino. Let's have a look. 3 dice, that should be good odds. Oh, there we go. So that's 9, 10, and then I've got 2 tokens. That's 12 in total, and I only needed an 8. So even though I overspent and I didn't need these tokens, they still are discarded into the bank. But I take that rhino, I put it into my collection, and I am now on my way to getting the photography award, which is 3 of a kind. So if I get 3 animals from the savannah, if I'd got that Nile crocodile, for example, then I would have got this award. But I can achieve it on another turn if I want to. It doesn't have to be on the same turn. So that's my turn over. I've photographed the animals, I've checked for awards. Have I triggered the end of the game? No, I've only got 2 animals. So pass the dice to the next player, and the game continues like that.
Remember, if ever you end your turn without taking any photographs at all, you will always gain 3 tracking tokens as your consolation prize. You never end a turn empty-handed.
The game ends when one player has photographed the target amount of creatures. In a 3-player game, for example, that is 8 animals. As soon as one player has 8 photographs in their collection, then the game end is triggered. The play continues until the round is finished, back to the first player, so that everyone has had the equal amount of turns, and then you score up. It's also possible to photograph more than the target number of photographs, because on your turn you can photograph multiple creatures, so you might even get 9 or 10 in this instance. So, the game is over, and now it's time to score up. Firstly, you add up the prestige on your animal cards, then you add up the prestige on your awards, then you add up the prestige on your assignment. Did I get a cover photo? I did, so that's 5 prestige. How many symbols did I get? 4, so that's 9 prestige. Fantastic. Add that all together, the player with the most prestige is the winner. If it's tied, then whoever has the most tracking tokens is the winner. Otherwise, you share the victory and you can both be Photographer of the Year. Tracking tokens are not actually worth any points at the end of the game, apart from breaking ties. So on your last turn, you probably want to spend all your tracking tokens, or most of them, in order to boost your odds right at the last minute. So let me give you a little bit more information about these photography awards. Let's say I had photographed 3 animals, and I got the top award. Now the top award is always worth the most points. 6 for shoreline, 7 for savannah, 8 for mountain, 9 for the rainforest. And then the second is always worth 5, and then the third is always worth 3. So it's a little bit of a race to get the first one, because it's always going to get you a little bit of a bonus. You definitely need to keep an eye on what other players are doing, and whether they're close to achieving a photography award that you're going after. Sometimes you may even photograph an animal you don't really want, just to secure that award before another player does. You can even win multiple awards from the same habitat. So if you'd photographed 6 savannah animals, for example, you then get a second token. If you photograph 9 savannah animals, you get the third token, and you get them all to yourself. The other type of photography award is one of each habitat. So if you can photograph 1 animal from each of the different habitats, then you can get the top token of this award. And that's worth 10 points. So that's the highest value award in the game. You definitely want to be keeping an eye out on who's about to get that and whether you can pit them to the post. Let me give you a little bit more information about the assignment cards. As I said before, there are 2 sections, the cover photo and the feature article. The cover photo is nice and simple. If you can photograph the animal listed on there, you get the 5 prestige as listed on the card. Now for me, I've got a cotton-top tamarin or a guanaco. I can't see any of those animals out here right now, so I'll need to keep researching. So that might tempt me to research a bit more during the game, or I might just have to keep my eyes out and see if another player draws it so I can reserve it from them. For the feature article, again, it's fairly simple. You just need to collect these symbols on the cards. So let's say this is the end of the game, and all these creatures are the creatures I've photographed. So I'm looking for omnivores and creatures with an average lifespan of over 31 years. This puffin? No. This wreath hornbill? It's got both of those, so that's 2 symbols already. This white rhino has 1 of those symbols, the average lifespan, so it's now 3. And then we look at the rainforest creatures. The sifaka has got none, so that's out. But this orangutan has got 1. It's got the average lifespan over 31 years. So that's now 4 symbols matching the symbols on my card. So look here, 4 symbols, 9 prestige. And that's my points. Now, remember, you always add both of these symbols up. You don't score for one symbol and then score for the other symbol. It's always the better option. It's always the combined symbols. We do have an expansion available, which includes an option for playing solo and also increasing the player count to 5. Now, the rules for those are available online, or of course, you can buy the expansion through our website. And that is Snapshot. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if there are any extra questions, just let us know. Go to our website and you can contact us through there. Or you can find us on Facebook and Instagram.